Not that long ago, it would have been unthinkable that a Latin American filmmaker would ever go and win the Oscar for Best Director. And guess what? Isn't that cool that 2 Mexican nationals win the Oscar for Best Director 3 years in a row? And in case you've been living under a rock, those have been Alfonso Cuarón for Gravity in 2014, Alejandro González Iñárritu for Birdman in 2015, and a year later with The Revenant. And that's just the very tip of the iceberg of an incredible film revolution that's happening in Latin America and has been going for some years now, and that I want to share with you today, that I feel very passionate through the work that I do through the not-for-profit organization I run, Cinema Tropical. And the accolades and the influence has not only been in Hollywood, it's been pretty much everywhere. Take, for instance, 2 other Mexican filmmakers, Carlos Regadas and Amate Escalante, who also won back-to-back the Best Director Award at the Cannes Film Festival, which arguably is still the most influential film festival in the world. Regadas won in 2012 with Post Tenebras Lux, and Escalante with Eli a year later. And Escalante also became the 4th filmmaker to ever win Best Director Awards both at Cannes and at Venice, right after Martin Scorsese, Emir Kusturica, and Paul Thomas Anderson. Also at Venice, Venezuelan filmmaker Lorenzo Vigas won the top prize, the Golden Lion, for his debut feature From Afar, marking the first time that a Latin American filmmaker wins the top honors. That's in 2015. Filmmaker from Guatemala, Jairo Bustamante, won the Silver Bear Alfred Bauer Prize at the Berlin Film Festival, marking the highest honor ever received by a Central American film production. And back in the US, at the Sundance Film Festival, between 2009 and 2014, 3 Chilean films won the Best International Feature at the festival. That was The Maid by Sebastián Silva, To Kill a Man by Alejandro Fernández Almendras, and Violeta Went to Heaven by Andrés Wood. So the first 2 decades of the new century have witnessed a major cinematic renaissance in Latin America. We know bells or whistle, no dogmas or manifestos. A young and enthusiastic generation of filmmakers are changing drastically how Latin America sees and projects itself in the big screen. And this renaissance has gone hand in hand with the major political shifts of the region as well, that has served as a creative fuel to challenge notions of politics, cultural, and identity. But where all this talent came from? Why, despite of increased and continuous production for almost 2 decades, the international gatekeepers of world cinema have largely overlooked the cinema of the region? Why we, as audiences, are not really aware of this amazing cinema? Well, first of all, we have to understand that Latin American cinema didn't start just 2 decades ago. You might have heard of Brazilian film Central Station or Mexican film like Water for Chocolate. But Latin American cinema started way earlier before. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, Mexico were able to create solid film industries. And then the region gave birth to the new Latin American cinema in the 60s, a really strong political movement that grew up from the experience of the Cinema Novo in Brazil, the Cuban Revolution, the cinema from Cuba post-revolution, as well as the documentary school of Santa Fe in Argentina, a very committed political cinema. By the 80s, production was pretty much at a record low because it was a horrible decade for Latin America, characterized by dictatorship, civil wars, and a perennial economic crisis. But then entered the mid-90s. A young generation of filmmakers from Argentina decided very discreetly to break free from the previous narratives, the heavy political allegories, and decided to make a more independent, more intimate, more minimal stories. And filmmakers like Lucrecia Martel, Martín Reckman, Lisandro Alonso, Pablo Trapero, and Adrián Catano discreetly paved the way for a younger generation of filmmakers to tell the stories they wanted. And that the case of the new Argentinian cinema was rapidly imitated in other countries. Around the same time, González Iñárritu debuted in Cannes in 2000 with his debut feature Amores Perros in the Critics' Week of the Cannes Film Festival, and went to win the top prize there. The film got some exposure in the US and really opened the door for the interest for Latin American cinema. Actually, the film also was nominated for Best Foreign Film after 20 years that Mexico hadn't had a nomination. 2 years later, Brazil also contributed to the international visibility of this renaissance of Latin American cinema with the fast-paced favela drama City of God, which also was nominated for 4 Academy Awards. And then that same year, Alfonso Cuarón went back to Mexico after directing 2 films in Hollywood and made the popular Y tu mamá también, starring Gael García Bernal and Mexican actor Diego Luna. And particularly, Gael García Bernal would provide a fresh face, would lend his face to kind of this renaissance for years to come. So what they did, Cuarón, Iñárritu, Meirelles, was basically blend those barriers between the art house and the mainstream, seducing both Hollywood and Cannes, and created a global cultural phenomenon. So we have, on one hand, the new Argentinian cinema. On the other hand, we have all these new global auteurs that really excited a whole generation. The thing is that back then, late 90s, early 2000s, no one would have imagined that this trend would be so influential and long-lasting. It's 2017, and it keeps coming on. I think one way to measure the success has been the increase of film production. For example, take Costa Rica, a country of 4.8 million people in Central America. In only 2 years, 2014 and 15, they doubled, with 20 feature films, they doubled the all-time production of films made since 1930. And that's just one small case. Mexico, for example, has become the 4th largest film exhibition country in the world, after China, India, and the United States. Mexico also broke records, production records last year with 162 films, more at the height of the golden era of Mexican cinema of the 40s and 50s. By the way, the whole production of Latin America is about 600 films, which is more than what Hollywood produces per year. So, characterizing this trend, what has happened is that we've seen younger, a really big generation. It's really a countless number of filmmakers have debuted, most of them in the 30s and 40s, although also younger filmmakers in their 20s have rapidly joined the ranks, as well as the older generation. Some of the filmmakers of the older generation, like Arturo Rivesen from Mexico, Nelson Pereira dos Santos from Brazil, Victor Gaviria from Colombia, or Patricio Guzmán and Alejandro Jodorowsky from Chile, they have also contributed to kind of this major renaissance with their experience and their vision. And then there's 3 particular aspects of these 3 key elements of this renaissance. One is the innovative creation of hybrid models of production. And hybrid, I mean private and public, national and international. And this form of production comes basically in three kinds. One, a direct government support. Second, innovative and groundbreaking tax incentives that has injected a lot of money from private capital. And third, fluid co-production treaties between Latin American countries and Europe. And what has this eclectic model of production, what has done is give entire freedom to the filmmakers, and not only independent cinema, also within mainstream cinema. And in that sense, filmmakers are really pushing the envelope. They are taking risks that filmmakers in other parts of the world cannot really take. And I think the Latin American model could serve like a really important case study how to reactivate American independent cinema. I think we have a lot to learn from Latin American cinema. The second element of this renaissance has been the diversity. Again, these eclectic models of production have really fueled different kinds of films and narratives and genres, and again, from the independent to the mainstream to a lot of also visual artists. That's happening in other parts of the world. A lot of visual artists and musicians are embracing cinema as a new way of communication and as a way to reach to new audiences. And the third part, which is very important, a key element of this renaissance, also I think is the political. As I mentioned, the Latin American cinema was particularly known for chronicling the struggle of the masses, of a lot of rural settings, a search for national identity. The new generation has break free from, or has enriched rather, this experience with chronicling the urban middle class experience. Also, embracing the idiosyncratic and challenging notions of Latin Americanness. Contrary to popular belief, most of the filmmakers actually have decided to stay home. And ironically, it's so much easier right now to have a film career, to claim a film career in Latin America than it is in the US. And also, a lot of filmmakers are not interested at all in Hollywood, also challenging the idea that Hollywood is the center of film production. That is not. Again, filmmakers in their 30s, 40s, they already made 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 films. Or in the case of Nicolás Pereda, very prolific filmmaker from Mexico, he's already made that more than 8 films. And he's not even 35. So how can we transform all this into more international awareness? Of course, and unmistakably, a group of filmmakers is also making the waves in Hollywood. This, beyond the filmmakers that I mentioned, and also Guillermo del Toro, the so-called Three Amigos, there's also a larger group of filmmakers making the waves in Hollywood, like Patricia Regan, Rodrigo Garcia, Patricia Cardoso, Andy Muschietti, and Fede Alvarez. These last two actually are renovating the whole genre, the whole horror genre in Hollywood, with films like Mama or Don't Breathe, and the revamping of the Evil Dead franchise. So Latin America is already taking also Hollywood. We're really everywhere. So how can we, why do we hear about it? Well, the problem is that for all of this artistry, all these accolades, and all this influence, Latin American cinema remains largely overlooked and underrepresented in the international film circuits. For one, even though I mentioned that there was a lot of excitement about Latin American cinema in the film festival circuit, there's a very limited number of spots for the films in the region in those festivals. Usually the whole region is just taken as a monolithic country, and usually there's like 2, 3 spots per festival. I mean, by the way, this year at the Cannes Film Festival, there's no Latin American film in the official competition. Second, it's a problem of validation as well. Once the films get to the film festival, but sadly, Latin America, or what we think of Latin America, is still tied to archaic notions of third world, of poverty, of really, we're reducing the whole experience of Latin America, a very diverse and heterodox region, to really monolithic themes. And for the festivals and for the programmers, if you're not talking about the topics that we think Latin America is, again, poverty, drug trafficking, immigration, then you're not Latin American enough. And that also, of course, affects the appreciation. And the fact that these films are not getting fully validated in film festival, that also hinders distribution in the US and abroad. Of the 600 films that Latin America produces annually, or that has been producing, only about 30 get a theatrical release in the US. That's 5% of the whole production. So, this amazing production has been just really reduced to its bare minimum. And also because of the geopolitical aspect of the film festivals, the filmmakers have to go export themselves to Europe first, then to the US, so they can get imported back. So all of this lack of visibility, lack of attention also hinders them distribution opportunities back home. So what's been happening for these 20 years calls for a big revision of Latin American cinema. I guess whenever it truly happens, we're going to be, oh my God, where were we? When all of this was happening. And through the organization I co-founded and I direct, Cinema Tropical, we've served like a sort of an embassy for all this amazing talent. We started in 2001 with a screening of Silvia Prieto by Martín Reckman, one of the key films and one of the key filmmakers of new Argentinian cinema. And actually the second event we produced was a special sneak preview of Amores Perros with the actor and the filmmaker in attendance. So as audience members, I urge you, I really want to invite you to discover the amazing world of Latin American cinema. And it's closer than you think. In platforms like Netflix, Amazon, there's already a lot of films that we don't know exist, but they're at our hand. And also in local film festivals, go out and check the Latin American films. I think you're really in surprise. Particularly under the current political context in the US. I think more than ever, we need to look south for insight and inspiration. And what a better way to do it than through cinema, because the present and the future is in the South. Thank you so much.